So there's a lot of people melting down right now over what the former Sony executive Chris Deering has recently said about the layoffs in the industry. Now, you guys already know. Me personally, don't really care that much about the layoffs in the industry because it's just a result of retardation that's taking over the entire AAA gaming industry. It's something that we deal with if we're, being in this industry and talking about it and whatnot. It's something we deal with all the time. Well, apparently, the former Sony executive Chris Deering has said that the video games industry layoffs is not the result of corporate greed. Of course he's not. And suggests laid off employees drive an Uber or go to the beach.
I'm rich, bitch!
Now, why would anybody sit there and expect that a Sony executive or a former Sony executive, somebody who is paid handsomely by corporate greed, would ever admit that corporate greed is a thing? Like, that's never going to happen, right? Does this guy look like he gives a fuck about gaming, man? This is a suited up guy, right? This is a guy who is an executive making a ton of money over at Sony, and of course he gets paid by corporate greed, so he's not going to want to downplay corporate greed. Of course not. He's going to want to go full on with the narrative and say that corporate greed is not the problem. So let's get into this article, guys, from That Park Place. But of course, before we do, if you are new here, just consider hitting that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it, and like the video to push us out into that YouTube algorithm. It's people like this that are the problem with the gaming industry. It really is. On top of obviously all the activists and stuff like that. But let me make something very clear, guys, in case you're unaware. Those activists that are ruining games right now, those developers, community managers, all those people, you know who actively employs them? You know who actively, keyword, weaponizes them? It's these kind of people right here, the executives, right? The executives weaponize these retards out there who actually genuinely believe that the company that they're working for gives a fuck about their social justice. It's these executives right here that weaponize those particular employees and are using them as ground troops to destroy the gaming industry. Because at the end of the day, they don't care. These executives get paid no matter what. It doesn't matter. They get massive salaries, massive bonuses, and they get paid to fail. It says former Sony executive Chris Deering, who was president of Sony Computer Entertainment Europe, shared that he does not believe that recent layoffs across the various video game developers are the result of corporate greed. On top of that, he suggested laid off employees find ways to make ends meet by driving for Uber or going to the beach. Imagine a fucking millionaire telling you some shit like that. It's insane. In an interview with My Perfect Console with Simon Parkin podcast, Deering was asked by Parkin, "I'm sure you are aware it's been a tough year for workers in the game industry, with around 20,000 layoffs in the last year or so. I think it's fair to say that there's a bit of frustration with video game executives at Microsoft, at Sony, wherever they are, who have been closing some smaller studios in order to funnel those resources into larger projects. It seems that the sort of prioritizing shareholders over nourishing a creative, diverse medium." Parkin continued, "I think you probably have more understanding than most of us about some of the pressures that those decision makers are under. But I suppose, how would you answer that accusation that some of these individuals are putting greed in front of creativity?" Well, truth be told, these people really can't talk about that, right? You can't talk about the fact that there are CEOs and executives putting greed over creativity because you, as a developer, most of you anyway, are putting activism in front of creativity, right? So it doesn't fucking matter. Like, both of you guys are doing dumb shit that you're deciding to put in front of creativity. Maybe if you guys work together and actually try to focus on creativity, you'll make something that people actually want to play. But no, you got one side being greedy as fuck, and they're usually the ones that are the cause of the monetization that people complain about. And then you got the other side, which is all activists, and they're the cause of the wokeness that people complain about. So it's like it's a double-edged sword, and both of them are dull. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's these people who are trying to make it seem, and they're pointing the finger, right? They're trying to make it seem as if it's somebody else's fault when they don't want to take accountability. This greedy corporate fuck is never going to take accountability for the monetization schemes that they do. And then the fucking activist is never going to take responsibility for the shit that they put into the video games that make them fail. So it just doesn't matter. Like, both of them are completely fucked. But let's see what he says. It says Chris Deering, former boss of PlayStation, does not believe the recent widespread layoffs in the games industry derive from corporate greed and that affected workers should drive an Uber. Deering responded, "Well, there's always going to be some greedy people and exploitative people, but there's a passion in the games industry that goes beyond just business and people, and it's a way of life. And I don't think that the console people in particular are that greedy. Maybe Nintendo was in some ways, but still they had a great relationship with their end users. What happened is you had the pandemic, people are sequestered to their living room or bedroom, and the industry took off in a huge way, and it got oversaturated, and it's going through a deflationary period, just like the consoles did when they were having those long turnaround times, minimum order quantities, he said. Guys, this entire thing is fucking cope, okay? That answer about, oh, it's oversaturated, we went too far, whatever, during COVID, it's a cope answer, okay? Are there some studios that probably overhired for COVID? Sure. Absolutely. But the fact of the matter is, money talks and bullshit walks, right? If you are going to hire that many people, you could actually maintain that many people if you were putting out stuff that actually was being purchased, right? If you have a game like Concord, do you think a game like Concord has a mass appeal that's going to support all the developers who made it, including the executives who pushed those developers? Do you think it's going to have it? No, obviously not. They don't care about mass appeal. They only care about putting out the project that they got paid to put out. And at the end of the day, they got paid, right? It doesn't matter if Concord dies, they still got paid. Imagine Firewalk Studios, every single developer there got paid for 8 years, and they didn't even have to supply a video game for it. How insane is that, right? They put out a video game for 10 days, packed it up, and went home and got paid for 8 years just to do that. It's insanity, right? It says what happened, again, I want to preface something. When it comes to these CEOs, they don't give a fuck. These guys get paid millions of dollars, super bonuses, to sit there and tell the wokies, hey, go be activists. We really care about what you're saying. Deering then asserted it's painful. I don't think it's greed. I think it's just an overexuberance that was kindled and fueled by the knock-on effect of the pandemic and the supply chain restrictions that followed. I don't think it's fair to say that the resulting layoffs have been greed. I think it's fair to say that if you guys, again, were putting out products that people actually want and paid for, that you could support these developers that you overhired for, right? If you had all the money in the world, if you were pulling in Hogwarts Legacy numbers, if you were pulling in Black Myth Wukong numbers, you think you're going to struggle to keep on some developers for years on end? Of course not. You're going to be perfectly fine. You're not going to have to suffer any layoffs. I don't see the developer that made Black Myth Wukong Game Science. I don't see them firing people. Gee, I wonder why that is. He continued, I always tried to minimize the speed with which we added staff because I always knew there would be a cycle of, and I didn't want to end up having the same problems that Sony did with electronics, so we never really. Now, of course, there was just a recently big layoff at Sony Studios in London, but that whole studio setup has been run out of Amsterdam. Now for a few years, and I don't know, if the money isn't coming in from the consumers in the last game, it's going to be hard to justify spending the money for the next game, he noted. I think it's probably very painful for the managers, but I don't think having skill is in this area is going to be a lifetime of poverty or limitation, he shared. It's still where the action is. It's like the pandemic, but now you're going to have to take a few, figure out how to get through it, drive an Uber or whatever, go off to find a cheap place to live and go to the beach for a year. This fucking guy. It's such millionaire language, bro, I swear. Listen, man, he did say something that was true, though. The consumers aren't going to buy this shit anymore, right? Like, they're not going to. You're seeing the numbers dwindle. You're seeing the amount of people that used to buy slop just to buy it are dwindling heavily because they're starting to wake up and they're starting to realize the conversation that's happening around video games right now and just all forms of entertainment, not just video games. They're starting to realize that, you know, and people are not falling for this shit anymore. And it's harder and harder for these developers to get away with this bullshit and get paid to do this shit. So that's why they're losing their mind and they don't know what to do and they're panicking. They really are. They're panicking. A lot of people, especially Firewalk Studios, they're panicking. So at the end of the day, man, put out a product that people like. People to put, sell something to the gamers. Make a game for gamers, and you would be surprised how much money you make. And all that money that you make, you can more than happily support all your developers for a long time. Look at Game Science for an example. But unfortunately for you, you just don't do that, right? Game Science almost made $1 billion on Black Myth Wukong. You think they're going to fire anyone anytime soon? You think they're going to struggle anytime soon? No, of course not. They got all the money they need to make the next game for the next few years, and they're chilling. You could have that too. But unfortunately, you decide to pick activism over anything. And then, of course, the CEOs decide to weaponize those activists and hope for the best. That's not how this works. You guys are failing miserably. The Western AAA gaming scene is failing miserably. And I really do hope the indie scene and the AA decide to take over and eat your lunch because you guys are sleeping at the wheel. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you did enjoy it. If you did, consider leaving me a subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to like the video, comment, let me know what you thought, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Hypnotic out.